very good morning to you, brethren. Today, I'll be preaching something different from my usual preaching style. Thank you, Brother Ivan, for reading the scriptures. That was already half the sermon. So, well, I'll try to finish fast so you all don't miss your Sunday lunch. Okay, so I want you to imagine this, all right? In the not too distant future, in one Tuesday morning, all right? In the future where autonomous self-driving level 3 is already available in Australia after the rest of the world has gotten it. So you see a man going to work, okay, driven in his car, whilst his daughter sits in the back on the way to drop off to school. The man has his iPad in his hand, going through his schedule and what he's going to do for the rest of the day at work. And then, suddenly, there was a void. There was no flash, there was no bang, there was no dust. But where the man sat, what was left was only his clothes and his pair of glasses in his seat. The iPad that he held on his hand has fallen on the center console and fractured the screen. And the daughter behind him was half asleep, and suddenly she realized that something was amiss. And she looked where her dad was. There's no one there. She thought she must be dreaming, rubbed her eyes. The dad still wasn't there. And then, suddenly the car started beeping because it sensed that there's no one sitting in the driver's seat. And the car automatically slowed down and pulled to the stop. And then suddenly, there are noises everywhere. Car honking. The car that was traveling beside was swerving in somebody else's lane, and then they were honking. And she looked, and there was no driver in the car. And opposite side, coming down the freeway, a truck has just rammed into a few cars there because the driver of the truck has disappeared. And then when everything stopped, she noticed the car in front. The lady just ran out and looking behind the passenger seat, trying to find someone, but there's no one. Now, when I describe this scene, what do you understand this? I know Quinton must be thinking, somebody snapped their fingers, okay, but that's not it. All right. What we're describing is called the rapture. Okay. So why am I talking about the rapture? You saw the title of my sermon. It's called 144,000. What has that got to do with the rapture? So, the 144,000, as we read, is found in Revelation chapter 7, and also some of it in Revelation chapter 14. And how we approach this, how we understand what is 144,000, okay, what affects our hermeneutics, that is how we approach and interpret the word, depends on our personal biases, our personal understandings. All right. So, things like your eschatological view of Revelation, whether you're a premillennialist, whether you're a postmillennialist, whether you're amillennialist, and then also what your views are of the end-time prophecy, whether you're a futurist, whether you're preterist, or whether you're somewhere in between. This all influences how you read the book of Revelations, especially because it is a book of prophecy. It's an apocalyptical book of prophecy that uses lots of apocalyptical language and also uses a lot of symbolisms. And then back to the question, why the rapture again? Because the rapture is something that is the predominant view now these days, especially among many who identify as Christians. Roy Quinton has discussed this topic some time ago. So I'm not going to go into much detail of this because what I'm going to talk about actually is 144,000. So but I will, for those of you who are unaware, what are all these terms, okay? What is premillennialism? So, for me, I want to talk about dispensational premillennialism, which is the current majority view. And it has been popularized in the 70s by Hal Lindsey when he wrote his book, The Late Great Planet Earth. Some of you might have read it. And then a bit more recently, in the 2000s, Tim LaHaye also came about with the Left Behind series, which is a very popular series of books and also made into a few movies. So, in the graph that or rather in the chart that we have, this is where the dispensational premillennialists are. They are futurists in their view or interpretation of Revelation. And basically how they read or interpret the book of Revelations is everything is going to happen sometime in the future. Okay. So, what they believe is the rapture transports believers to heaven, where they meet the judgment seat of Christ in 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 10, where there will be no condemnation for them, but just an evaluation of their works and of their faithfulness, right? So, see that line there? Evaluation of their works based on their merits and their faithfulness, and that will determine their hierarchy in heaven, or rather, not in heaven, but in their eternal state. And then, in heaven, they will also participate in what they call the marriage of the Lamb, as you can read in Revelation 19, verses 7 to 9. And the church is the bride of Christ then, where there will be a grand wedding in heaven. At the same time, tribulation will rage on earth. Okay, so what they believe is there will be a future rapture where people are just, faithful Christians are just taken away from earth into heaven, where they escape the great tribulation. And then of the remaining in earth, 144,000 Jewish evangelists will emerge, and then they will evangelize the rest of the earth. So, what they believe is the 144,000, now we get to 144,000, this is a literal number, the exact number of the Jewish evangelists, the male Jewish evangelists that will evangelize the world during the 7 years of tribulation, as in Revelation chapter 7, verse 14. And I said to him, "Sir, you know." So he said to me, "These are the ones who come out of the great tribulation and washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb." So what is this tribulation? This tribulation is an era of persecution in earth, they believe, for 7 years, where the Antichrist will come, and then where they will be subject to the 7 seals or 7 trumpets and the 7 bowls of judgment that we read in Revelation, where the wrath of God will pour upon the people, and it concludes with the Battle of Armageddon. And during this time, the 144,000 Jewish evangelists will convert people on earth. And what they believe is God's prophetic timeline, which had been paused when the church was born at Pentecost, has now resumed in this period of tribulation. And then they believe also that this is a period where God focuses his redemptive work directly on the nation of Israel. And then, moving on, The dispensational premillennialists also view the second part, which is Revelation chapter 7, verse 9, the multitudes. Okay, these multitudes, after these things I looked, and behold, a great multitude which no one could number, of all nations, tribes, peoples, and tongues, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed with white robes, with palm branches in their hands. Okay, these multitudes are actually the tribulation martyrs, those that have been preached to by the 144,000 Jewish evangelists. Okay, these can be Jews or Gentiles. And what happens to the Christians that have been raptured? They will eventually descend with Jesus after 7 years in Revelation 19, verse 14. At the end of the millennium, or the end of the 1,000 years. Sorry, not at the end of the millennium. To start the millennium, or to start the 1,000 years, whereby their role is still subject to debate, it's undetermined, but it is understood by the dispensationalists that they are not ruling with Christ. It's the nation of Israel, the 144,000, that will rule. So this doctrine basically separates Israel from the church. And in this period of tribulation, God focuses his redemptive work in the nation of Israel. And also in this doctrine, the church is displaced from the Revelations 6 to 19 narrative. And then finally, they believe that millennium will conclude with the final judgment, whereby New Jerusalem will descend. In Revelation chapter 21, verse 10, and he carried me away in the spirit to a great and high mountain, and showed me the great city, the holy Jerusalem, descending out of heaven from God. So in Revelation chapter 21, verses 12 to 14, also mentions the 12 gates inscribed with the names of the 12 tribes of Israel, and the 12 foundations inscribed with the names of the 12 apostles. And here, Israel occupies the elevated position in eternal order, whilst the church occupies a different role. So because this is the majority view of most of people these days, and that's why we have a lot of people supporting the nation of Israel, because they believe that one day these 144,000 will arise from this nation. Right. So next we have the Jehovah's Witnesses, also known as the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society. Again, they believe that the 144,000 is a literal head count, but unlike the dispensational premillennialists, they are more historicists or continuous historical in their approach to premillennialism. And they believe that these 144,000 are the literal 144,000 of all humans who have ever lived throughout history and have been anointed by the Holy Spirit to enter into heaven. These are known as the little flock. And they come with resurrected spiritual bodies and will rule alongside Jesus in the heavenly kingdom. So this, and then they also view the multitudes, as a separate group. This is called the great crowd, and they compose of the rest of faithful mankind, who will not enter heaven, but will live on a restored and a renovated paradise earth. So the 144,000 will be part of the new covenant, where Jesus is the direct mediator, and the great crowd, they achieve salvation by associating and supporting the remaining members of the 144,000 who are still on earth. And then we have the Seventh-day Adventists. Again, they are also premillennialists and historicists in their view. They believe that these 144,000 are the end-time remnants of living believers, basically the believers who are still alive when the end time is there. Okay, so this could be a symbolic or literal number as they believe, and then they will endure a global tribulation. And this is defined as the close of human probation, where the last 7 plagues of Revelation will be poured out, immediately preceding the second coming of Christ. So this time of trouble, or the Great Tribulation, is when the restraining presence of the Holy Spirit is understood by them to have withdrawn from this wicked world. So the 144,000 must stand then without any intercessor, in perfect obedience and in reliance to Christ's grace during this intense persecution, to serve as the ultimate vindication of God's law and character against the accusations of Satan. So basically, these 144,000 are heroes, warriors of God that have been prepared throughout time, and now they are on their own. Okay, so they will fight or withstand Satan for God. And the seal of God that they read in Revelation chapter 7, verse 2 to 3, are understood by them to be the observance of Sabbath, because they are loyal to the fourth commandment. Okay, they worship on a Saturday. And this is in defiance to the mark of the beast, which they understood as Sunday worship. And finally, these 144 victorious warriors will be translated to heaven. They do not experience any death like Enoch or Elijah. And the great multitude, which is the second group, are all resurrected believers from previous generations throughout history of man. Now, finally, what does the church then believe? The Church of Christ is amillennial in their eschatological framework. Some are partial preterists, some are idealists or symbolists, and occasional preterists. So, we believe that Jesus is already reigning right now from heaven. His return will be a singular event for the final judgment at the end of the physical world. We are currently living in the millennium. There is no literal 1,000-year millennium. That's why it's called amillennial. And the second coming of Christ is when the resurrection of the righteous and wicked face the final judgment, culminating in the fiery destruction of the world, and there will be a permanent transition into an eternal state, also called Abed. There will be the new heavens and the new earth. So, as I mentioned, the 1,000 years in Revelation 20 is the current church age, and it's a symbolic representation. It is not the literal 1,000 years, since Christ's kingdom was inaugurated in Pentecost in Acts chapter 2. And this understanding opposes premillennialism, which calls for an erroneous materialization of a fundamentally spiritual kingdom. And dispensationalism also gets Revelation's time statement wrong. Revelation chapter 1, verse 1 says, that these things which must shortly take place. And Revelation chapter 1, verse 3 also says that the time is near. Okay, so to the early readers of the book of Revelations, where it was intended for, mainly the churches in Asia Minor, when they read that the time is near and that things must come shortly, it is to warn them that something is about to happen, not something that will happen, or slowly unveil over the next 2,000 years. All right, so enough of the introduction. If anyone's interested, I could talk about the all these eschatological view at some other days, but the main topic today is about 144,000. First question is, are these numbers, or is this number literal or symbolic? As we saw the few views, and I'm sure there are still many out there, a lot believe that they are literal numbers, some believe that they are symbolic numbers. 144,000, we understand, is the mathematical symbol of ultimate theological completeness. And it is derived by multiplying 12, which represents the patriarchs of the 12 tribes of Israel under the Old Covenant, and by 12, which then represents the apostles under the Old Covenant, as we read in Revelations 12, verse 21, Revelations 21, verse 12, and verse 14 just now. And then we finally multiply this product by 1,000, which is the biblical symbol for vast, complete magnitude, and often used in a military context. As we can see in Revelations, in Psalms chapter 50, verse 10, for every beast of the forest is mine, and the cattle of 1,000 hills. Now, does this mean that only 1,000 hills? What about the 1,001 hills? Is that also God's? Obviously it is, because this is just a symbolic number that means that it is extensive, it is vast. Revelation chapter 9, verse 16 says, the number of mounted troops was twice 10,000 times 10,000. I heard their number. For every beast of the forest is mine. We read that again. So this 1,000 is a biblical symbol for a vast, innumerable amount. And when we read the book of Revelations, we encounter many symbolic numbers there. Okay. And here is a chart of them. All right. In the interest of time, we will not be going through all this. But if you're interested, you can look up all these numbers by yourself. Each of them has got a different meaning. So the 144,000 represents the entire spiritual Israel, the total sum of God's covenant people from both the Old and New Testament, and all of God's people, perfectly complete and none missing. And it's not a literal head count. Because if it was a literal head count, then only unmarried male virgins and Israelites can go to heaven. As we read in Revelation chapter 14, verse 14. And that will also exclude Abraham, Moses, Peter, because they are all married, as well as all women from heaven. So the description of these 144,000 as virgins who have not defiled themselves with women is to be taken metaphorically. They have refused to participate in the spiritual adultery of emperor worship and apostate Jerusalem. In Revelation chapter 18, we read about Babylon the Great. And mention that the kings of earth commit adultery with her. This is understood to be the Roman Empire at that time. But if we apply that to our times these days, this could be any form of adultery. And women that's used here means or symbolizes the spiritual fornication or idolatry and not the literal females. Paul also uses an identical imagery in 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 2. For I am jealous for you with godly jealousy, for I have betrothed you to one husband, that I may present you as a chaste virgin to Christ. So if we read this symbolically, then we understand that these are people who have not bowed to evil during the time of tribulation, and not the literal male virgins. So the next question is this ethnic or spiritual Israel? Right, we know that the dispensationalists will say that these are all Jews. But the identities of the 10 tribes, the 10 northern tribes of Israel, were lost in 722 BC when the Assyrians took them away. All tribal records after that was also destroyed when Jerusalem was invaded and destroyed by the Roman Empire in AD 70. So a literal census was historically impossible. And most Jews do not know their ancestry anymore. if Revelation chapter 7 verse 4 ended there without listing out all the tribes of Israel, then probably I would also have been confused that this could be the literal Jews. But because they listed out the list of the 12 tribes of Israel, we know that this list is different from the actual list that can be found in Numbers chapter 1. Here we have Judah listed as the top instead of Reuben, who is the firstborn and is normally listed at the top in all other census. Why is Judah listed at the top? It's because Judah is the messianic tribe. Okay, so hence it was put above Reuben. And then if we look at the list, we also notice that the tribe of Dan and the tribe of Ephraim are missing. But the tribe of Levi, okay, which is not considered part of the 12, is listed instead. So, what does that tell us? Okay, if it was a literal tribe, then all would have been listed according to order, and all tribes that are part of the 12 tribes would have been listed. But here we have missing tribes. Okay, the tribe of Joseph is listed instead, but Joseph is not a tribe. Joseph's portion was given to two of his sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, because his father adopted them. And hence they each have, are considered a tribe of Israel. Okay, in the interest of time, I will just skip this part. Okay, so, and if this was a literal Jewish tribe, then it will contradict what Jesus says in Matthew chapter 8, verse 11, where he says, "And I say to you that many will come from the east and west and sit down with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven." Again, that will also mean that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob would be excluded from the kingdom of heaven because they are not of the 12 tribes. And then the next question is, Revelation 7, is the 144,000 and the great multitude one or two groups? Most of the views that we saw believe and understand that these are of two different groups. But we understand that Revelation chapter 7 verse 4 and Revelation chapter 7 verse 9 is describing the same group of people. Here we have in Revelation chapter 7 verse 4 that John heard the number from the angel from the east and east. But in verse 9, when he looked, he looks and he sees a great multitude which no one could number. He did not just see the 144,000 people, but he saw a great number that could not even be counted. And these people that stood there were not only Jews, but were Gentiles from every nation. So we understand that this is the same group of people, but viewed from two different perspectives. Just as in Revelation chapter 5, verse 5 to 6, where verse 5 says, "But one of the elders said to me, 'Do not weep. Behold, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Root of David, has prevailed to open the scroll and to loose its 7 seals.'" Here John hears the elder announce the Lion of the tribe of Judah, but what happens when he looked in verse 6? "And I looked, and behold, in the midst of the throne of the 4 living creatures, and in the midst of the elders stood a lamb, as though it had been slain, having 7 horns and 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of God sent out into all of earth." When he looks, he sees the lamb, as though it had been slain. So the lion and the lamb are two very different creatures. He could not mistaken them. He could not have mistaken them. So he was told that there was a lion, but when he looked, it was a lamb. So following this pattern, the 144,000 and the great multitude, which we read after this, are of the same group. but described from two different ways. One which is audible or symbolic, and one which is visual or actual. Revelation 7:15 says, "Therefore they are before the throne of God, and serve him day and night in his temple. And he who sits on the throne will dwell among them." And both this group of people, the 144,000 and the great multitude, they are in heaven. Because the throne of God and his temple are in heaven, as we read in Revelation chapter 4, verse 2 to 10, and also Revelation chapter 11, verse 19. And this is not an earthly class. Okay, they are not on earth, which contradicts the dispensational premillennialism. Right. So, 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 9 says, "But you are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, his own special people, that you may proclaim the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light." So this is another reason why we say that these are not just literal Jews, but also they are the church, Christians. Because Peter here writes to a predominantly Gentile audience and uses language from Exodus chapter 19, verse 5 to 6, which originally was intended for national Israel. He uses these terms that were terms used on Israel to describe the church, the Christians. Also in Exodus 19, verse 5 to 6, "Now therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, then you shall be a special treasure to me above all peoples, for all the earth is mine. And you shall be to me a kingdom of priests, a holy nation. And these are the words which you shall speak to the children of Israel." So without using the word Israel here, Peter unmistakably transfers Israel's covenant titles to the church. God also shows no partiality. Acts chapter 10, verses 34 to 35. And this contradicts Jehovah's Witnesses' class system, where there is a class of super Christians, the 144,000, which will enjoy heaven, and the rest of the great multitude, which will be stuck on a renovated paradise earth. And it also contradicts, the hierarchy system of the premillennialists, who says that you will be judged according to your words, okay, and get your place in heaven. So the Jehovah's Witness system fragments the church by introducing hierarchy, and they restrict access to the full promises of the new covenant, and invites people to an earthly hope rather than a heavenly co-heirship. Ephesians 2:11 to 22. This is a long one. I will not be reading it, but here we can see that Paul describes that there are two peoples, the Jews and the Gentiles, have been made one, and the wall that separates them has been broken down, and they are no longer separate them. And Jesus has reconciled them both to God in one body. And Christ has made one new man out of the Jew and the Gentiles. Galatians chapter 3, verses 7 to 9. Okay, so the dispensationalists will teach that there are separate, distinct plans of salvation for ethnic Israel and the Christian church. But brethren, the church is not a plan B while waiting for the Jewish remnant to fulfill future prophecies. Galatians 3, verse 7 to 9 says that those who are of faith are sons of Abraham. Okay. And then if you read further down, they are also described as Abraham's seed and heirs according to the promise. And these titles, these are all given to all who believe in Christ, regardless of their ethnicity. And then we press on to Romans chapter 9, verses 6 to 8, where Paul distinguishes those who are ethnic Israel, okay, here he called of Israel, and true Israel or spiritual Israel, he terms as all Israel. Because not everyone who is born of Israel belongs to God's Israel. The children of promise, which are the believing Jews and Gentiles who are Christians, they are described as the true seed here. And then Romans chapter 2, verses 28 to 29. Again, Paul defines a Jew as one who is one inwardly, okay, and whose heart is changed by the Spirit, not someone who is just born into a Jewish ethnicity or Jewish family. Galatians chapter 6, verse 16. Paul here describes, okay, as many as walk according to this rule, peace and mercy be upon them and upon the Israel of God. Here Paul calls the church the Israel of God. So we understand from Paul's perspective that the church, okay, is also known as Israel, the spiritual Israel. Let's look at one more illustration, the illustration of the olive tree. This is described in Romans chapter 11, verses 16 to 24. Again, it is a long passage. I will not be reading it in the interest of time. But here we can see that there is one tree. There is one root, okay, which is the Abrahamic promise. And unbelieving Jews, which are the branches, the natural branches, they are broken off, whilst believing Gentiles, they are being grafted back in. And also, there's a warning back that if the believing Jews come to believe, come to faith, they can also be regrafted in. So membership of this tree is determined by faith, not by ethnicity. The olive tree is the people of God. Okay, it's one continuous covenant community from Abraham to the present, and the roots can be the patriarchs of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and the natural branches, okay, are the ethnic Israel. While the wild olive shoot that has been grafted in is me, it's you, okay, Gentile believers. Paul here did not say that God has planted a new olive tree for the Gentiles. He also did not say that the old olive tree had been uprooted and replaced. Okay, but he says that the wild branches are grafted into the existing tree. And that is why these 144,000 are described using the Israel tribal imagery in Revelation chapter 7. The tribes, 144,000, they are not ethnic Jews, excluding the Gentiles. The tribes are the covenant structure of God's people into which Gentiles have been grafted. And when the Revelations lists these 12 tribes, it is listing the covenant family which you and I now belong to. So, the replacement theology that is taught by the Methodists, Catholics, and Presbyterians is the idea that the church has simply replaced Israel because the old law is no longer, or somehow has failed and has somehow been rendered useless, and that's why the church is now to replace that. But that is not what we believe. Okay, we believe in what we call a fulfillment theology, whereby the church, okay, is grafted in. It's a continuation of the Old Testament. All right, so this has been in God's plan all the while, that the church will eventually replace the Judaism system. And it's not because that it has failed. That's why God has to come up with a second plan. So, if there is one new man, one body, and one olive tree, then there is not only one saved people called the church and another saved people called Israel with parallel destinies. There is one redeemed people in Christ. The 144,000 cannot be a separate elite Jewish class. They are an image of that one covenant people seen under the Israel tribal symbolism. So, in conclusion, Revelation is symbolic and uses numbers to show spiritual truth. The 144,000 is a carefully constructed number, a picture that marks the complete people of God. And the list in Revelation chapter 7 is based on theology, based on spiritual Israel, and not just a strict Jewish genealogy. And this group, the 144,000 and the great multitude, are best seen as two views of the same group, and all will be saved. New Testament, as we read, mainly writings of Paul, says that the true Israel is determined by faith in Christ and that all believers are Abraham's seed. So the sealed in the New Testament are all Christians, not a special Jewish class. And God has one people, not two separate groups with two separate destinies. Therefore, the teaching that the 144,000 are a small group of ethnic Jews, separate from the rest of the saved, does not fit the message of Revelation or the teaching of the New Testament as a whole. The 144,000 are best understood as a symbolic picture of all God's people. Okay? The spiritual Israel who are sealed, protected, and finally brought safely home to stand before his throne. And when people believe that the church will be removed or will be raptured before this real tribulation happens, then it creates a passive mindset, whereby urgency is displaced from faithfulness to future escape. In contrast, we understand that we are all active participants in this tribulation, in this eschatological conflict, and not preparing for a future tribulation. We are currently engaging in our own Babylon the Great. So this 144,000 is not a mystery that we need to be anxious about. They are not a limited quota that you might miss. They are not Jewish super evangelists appearing in a future tribulation. They are the church, the full, complete, sealed, preserved, victorious church. They are spiritual Israel. They are the olive tree which you and I, as Gentile believers, have been grafted in through grace and faith. And if you understand that you are grafted into this covenant people of God and counted among the complete number, standing with the Lamb on Mount Zion, then this is not a source of anxiety, but it is a source of assurance for all of us. So, if you are, still one of the wild olive branches that have not been grafted in, perhaps this is a time to, consider that you might want to be part of the covenant olive tree. And with that, I end my lesson today. Thank you. That's all. Stan?
Let us stand.